Hello everyone, welcome back to another video where today we're going to be taking a look at the viewing figures for the overnights of Doctor Who Season 2 Episode 4 Lucky Day. And it's not fantastic news, Doctor Who did drop slightly lower once again this week. However, as always, there are several caveats and conditions to that I want to go over and kind of just give you my thoughts on this figure and kind of where we're at this stage in the game. But before we get into it, subscribe if you're new, that would be greatly appreciated. We're trying to get to 30,000 subscribers and any support would be appreciated in helping us get to that goal. But with that said, let's get right into it. Ratings. Doctor Who dips to lowest ever for 4th episode, Lucky Day. Doctor Who continued on BBC One on Saturday 3rd of May with Lucky Day, which scored an overnight audience of 1.5 million. The consolidated rating, which will include iPlayer, devices and catch-up, will be released 12th of May. So yeah, again, bear in mind, this doesn't include devices, iPlayer, catch-up, or the people who watched before broadcast. This also doesn't include Disney Plus, so we don't really know how it's performing internationally. Overall, it was the BBC's third most watched programme of the day, behind the hit list Celebrity and Casualty. It was a low night all round for BBC One, which failed to break 2 million all night. It was no match for ITV's Britain's Got Talent and the 1% Club, with 2.5 times the audience most of the night. So, there's a couple of interesting things there that I want to dive into. One, nothing on BBC One reached 2 million viewers. So, whilst 1.5 million might sound low for Doctor Who, and, don't get me wrong, it is lower than I would like, it's important to acknowledge that literally nothing on BBC One that night reached 2 million overnight viewers. It's also worth considering that if you were to count the iPlayer viewers before transmission, it would probably bump up Doctor Who by, about 100,000, maybe a bit less, according to, sort of recent data. But yeah, of course, the ITV kind of game show talent shows, Britain's Got Talent and the 1% Club remain dominant. This isn't really a surprise. This has kind of always been the case, particularly with Britain's Got Talent, which is why, and I've said this a couple of times, and I'll say it again, I don't really know why they keep scheduling Doctor Who directly opposite Britain's Got Talent. It feels like a losing battle to me. Britain's Got Talent has always outperformed Doctor Who. Like, that's not a new thing, Britain's Got Talent has always been dominant in British TV ratings. And it sort of appeals to a similar kind of family demographic, albeit they're very different shows. But Britain's Got Talent actually has, kind of a wider appeal with more people, It's more kind of easy to watch for a lot of people rather than Doctor Who, which is a bit more of an acquired taste. But yeah, I just don't really know why Doctor Who is being put directly opposite the Britain's Got Talent semi-final, which is also live as well, so there's more of an urgency to watch a live semi-final than there is to watch Doctor Who, which was already on iPlayer 12 hours beforehand. I just think it's a bit odd in terms of scheduling. I mean, I'm sort of in agreement with Mr. TARDIS at this point. I think that Doctor Who probably works better these days in the autumn months. I know that Doctor Who aired in April around the RTD1 era, but even that faced difficulties in April with like the weather and such. It's actually really interesting because thanks to Doctor Who Positivity, they posted this article from 2006, people trying to use the ratings again. Here's an article from 2006 when David was the Doctor. Doctor Who loses momentum. This was 18 years ago on the 30th of May 2006. It's another mystery for Doctor Who. Where have the viewers gone? BBC One's Doctor Who revival has been lavished with critical praise and awards, but there are signs midway through its second series that viewers may be tiring of the time-travelling sci-fi drama. Saturday's Doctor Who, the 7th out of 13 episodes in the second series, had the lowest audience share of any instalment yet. The show returned last year to rave reviews and big audiences. The Idiot's Lantern, written by League of Gentlemen co-creator Mark Gatiss, featured Time Lord David Tennant and his sidekick Billie Piper, foiling an attempt by Maureen Lipman's evil alien to feed off the people watching the Queen's coronation in 1953 on TV. A fairly typical Doctor Who storyline, but one which only attracted 6.3 million viewers and a 32% audience share. Doctor Who has shed 2.3 million viewers and 10 share points in 2 weeks. It's fascinating to watch basically the same arguments be made 20 years ago. Of course, you might say, oh, well, 6.3 million is a lot higher than, like 1.5 and then like 3 million consolidated. And you are right, but it's also worth considering that nothing is getting 6.3 million now. Like, the highest anything seems to get, at least at this time of year, is about 5 million, and that's like your absolute limit. So it is kind of funny watching the exact same arguments be used now as were being used 20 years ago. You know, people were already saying in 2006 that Doctor Who was losing momentum with audiences, which was, of course, very much not the case. Again, am I saying that Doctor Who is in the best position it's ever been in? No, I do think that there are signs for, concern, and I do think that the numbers are lower, which I think is a grave shame, because I do think Season 2 is a vast improvement over not only Season 1, but also the last few years of the programme. I will be interested to see the consolidateds for Episode 3. Obviously, that did 1.9 million as a result of a boost from the football. And I do think, I kind of agree with what my friend Matthew Purchase said over on Twitter. 3 million is where I think Doctor Who will plateau, which is in line with the general decline in TV viewing. Most long-running shows are getting about half of what they used to a decade ago. I think the figure is just about okay. It's whether the BBC can justify the cost, and this is the key. Doctor Who being made for 3 million people, while not ideal, and I'm sure that Bad Wolf BBC would have wanted a higher number, 3 million people in the current climate, just in Britain, is not awful. It's just a question of whether the BBC can justify the cost of something that appeals to 3 million people that does cost way more than most of their other shows. Now, to be fair, this is not a one-for-one comparison. As I've said before, Doctor Who has merchandising sales that far eclipse any other BBC property, and also has more distribution appeal internationally than pretty much any of their other shows. I mean, of course, we don't know what's going to happen with this Disney deal, but even if that falls through, I don't imagine that people will just stop distributing Doctor Who worldwide. Chances are another place will pick it up, or maybe BBC America will go back to doing it. I don't know, but my point is, Doctor Who does have a wider global appeal than most other BBC shows do, so there are ways to offset the cost. I still think that the most likely outcome of the next series, or, going forwards with Doctor Who, is they take a year off, reassess things, and the show comes back in 2027 with a third season on a lower budget. Whether that will be Gatwa included, I don't know, but that's kind of where my head's at. Which, while not ideal, would not be the worst thing in the world. I actually think that Doctor Who kind of thrives when its budget is a little bit less. But yeah, whilst this is not great, and I'm not going to sit here and say that Doctor Who is doing fantastically in the ratings, I think it is worth saying in context that it was still the third most watched thing on the BBC that night, and nothing on the BBC cracked 2 million. So if you're going to say that Doctor Who is dead, you kind of have to say that, like, all of British TV is dead, which it kind of is. But I just find it funny that, like, only Doctor Who ever seems to get this treatment. No one ever talks about Casualty going woke, despite the fact that it also was under 2 million viewers, but hey-ho, I've said that before. I've said my piece on that before. In other news, though, we also had a breakthrough with regard to the FA Cup. Now, if you remember, I covered this in a live stream. I said that one of the issues coming up is that the FA Cup scheduling was being fought between the BBC and ITV. The BBC wanted it at 3 PM to ensure that Doctor Who and Eurovision could still play. ITV were pushing for 5:30 to maximise viewership and advertising demand. And a breakthrough was finally made. It appears that they've made a compromise with the FA Cup final airing at 4:30 PM BST, which would allow enough time for Doctor Who and Eurovision, provided football doesn't go to extra time. So we really just have to hope that the football doesn't go to extra time, because if it does, then Doctor Who will probably get bumped from the schedule, which would not be great for its viewing figures. And I also think that it's a massive opportunity for Doctor Who, in its current iteration, to be wedged right between two big events, i.e. the FA Cup final and Eurovision. Both are very, big events for, admittedly, two different demographics, but still. And especially considering it has a Eurovision tie-in episode with, a sort of all-star cast, I really, really hope that this manages to make it into the schedules. But yeah, that's my thoughts on the viewing figures as well as the scheduling for Doctor Who. Obviously, I'm going to be interested to see how the Well performs in the consolidated, to see whether any of the good word of mouth spreads to the viewing figures. I think Matthew Purchase is right. I think around 3 million is like our floor, which, while not, fantastic, it's also not the worst thing in the world. We could be at 2 or 1 million consolidators, which would, I think 1 million consolidated would truly be kind of raise the alarms. This show is probably in trouble. But 3 million consolidated, yeah, it's not great, but could be a lot worse. As I've said before, it's noteworthy that Doctor Who has had a relatively strong hold this series. Last year started at around 4 million, and this series started around 3.5, which yes is a drop, but that's also expected from one series to another. But that's not a massive drop, and the numbers have stayed relatively consistent, so I do think 3 million is about, where the floor is for Doctor Who, hopefully. But we'll just have to wait and see. But what are your thoughts on the viewing figures? Let me know down in the comments below. I'm sure I'll get wonderful comments on the viewing figure videos, as always. But if you did enjoy this video, please give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you later.